Why did God create this world? If God is perfect and lacks nothing, why did he create anything at all? It's true, from philosophy alone, we can't understand why God would create this world. But, fortunate for us, God revealed himself at Mount Sinai to the Jews and told the Jewish nation exactly why he created this world. And in this video, we understand from classical Judaism why God did create this world. So here's how it goes. We hold that God is perfect. He is infinitely good. A being who is infinitely good, though, is not satisfied with just keeping his goodness to himself. Instead, a being who is infinitely good seeks to share his goodness with others, because goodness, by its very nature, desires to give and to benefit others. We know that potential goodness is inferior to actualized goodness. And so since God is perfect, he chooses to actualize his goodness. But God isn't satisfied with just giving a little bit of goodness. Him, being infinitely good and perfect, wants to give the maximal amount of goodness possible. How can God give the maximal amount of goodness possible? Well, let's think. What can this maximal goodness be? God is maximally good. So for another being to have maximal goodness, they would need to be God. So God would have to create God. But God, by definition, is independent and not created. So then, since he can't create God, God decided to create a creature with as much godness as possible, with as much of him as possible. Because a creature who has the maximal amount of godness will have the maximal amount of goodness, because God is good. A lot of times we call this godness godliness. So God wanted to create a creature that has godlike characteristics. Because these godlike characteristics is as close to godness that a creation can possibly be. And so once a creature possesses godness, they also possess goodness. So how can God create such a creature? What are the godlike characteristics that this creature can have? So what are God's characteristics? God is infinite. God is independent. God is not created. Yikes. God can't give any of these because the creature is by definition finite and dependent. However, God is also self-determined. And God can make a creature that has some of this self-determination. This self-determination is free will. God has the ultimate free will. He isn't influenced or constrained by anything outside of himself. But God could give creatures free will in part. Creatures that have the means to be able to choose to do certain things, like how God chooses to do certain things. And so this is the ultimate godlike characteristic that we have. In this way, we are created in the image of God, in the likeness of God. That free will reflects God's self-determination. And so in addition to this free will allowing us to have some of that godness, allowing us to possess goodness, free will also allows creatures to develop the moral characteristics that God himself identifies with, which are good, because God identifies with them. How does free will allow us to develop these moral characteristics? Well, just imagine something that doesn't have free will. Take a computer. A computer can never be truly kind. Sure, it can flash a compliment on the screen, but we know that the computer is programmed to do that. It didn't independently choose to do it like we humans can choose to do it. Humans, though, can be truly kind because we have that free will. Choosing to help the elderly cross the street is a kind gesture because you chose to do it. If you didn't have any choice, then the action wouldn't be inherently kind. So here's where we're at. God needed a recipient to express his goodness. He can't create another God. God is maximally good. How to give a creation maximal goodness? Through self-determination, through free will. By giving the creation free will, they then possess godness, goodness, which then allows them even further to acquire the moral characteristics that God identifies with, which then helps that creation possess more good. And so we're the recipient of that goodness. And in order for us to have that maximal goodness, we should be trying to acquire those moral characteristics that God identifies with. As Deuteronomy 28 verse 9 says, you shall walk in God's ways. And so what are the moral characteristics that God identifies with? Take mercy, loving kindness, grace, justice, faithfulness, forgiveness, truth, and obviously goodness. So a common objection occurs. Are you implying that God needs us? God didn't have anybody to express his goodness, so he needed to create us? There are perhaps two ways to approach this problem. The first way is God's needs are not like our needs. Our needs imply dependency. We need food. If we don't have food, we cease to survive. We are then dependent on food. God, though, is not dependent on anything. He exists independently. So he does not need anything outside of himself for his own existence. But here's where God's needs are different from humans' needs. If God needs something, it's not that he won't exist without this need. He's not dependent on anything for his own existence. If God needs something, then he can create something to fulfill his own need. That's not a dependency. He will never not exist. The other way, though, that we can respond to this is that God independently chose to need. He chose to exercise his goodness, his loving kindness, and in choosing to do so, he now needs something. But him choosing to need something is not him actually needing something. The other question is, well, what about God before creation? If God's good and he needs to express his goodness, because that's what makes him perfect, then before creation, was he not perfect? And to this we respond that it's a nonsensical question. God created time, so there was no before creation. It was creation and everything else after it. God is independent of time. But back to the moral characteristics that we should be trying to acquire. If you notice, these moral characteristics require expression. Loving kindness, mercy, and justice are not just inner states of being. They must be directed towards something. For example, when you're kind to something. You're kind to someone, to yourself, to your dog. So loving kindness, by definition, requires a recipient. And this is exactly how God created the world. Psalm 89:3 says that the world is built on loving kindness. Creation reflects God's desire to bestow goodness. And that loving kindness requires the recipients, and we're those recipients. But if we are to possess the moral characteristics, the loving kindness that God has, then we too also need recipients. So who are these recipients? At first thought, it feels like the other recipients are other people. But think about where this leads. If all of creation's purpose is to express loving kindness, then expressing loving kindness to another person means that I'm helping them express their own loving kindness, which means that they should be helping another person express their own loving kindness if other people are the recipients. And so this kind of just ends in a loop. To see this more clearly, imagine a world with just three people, Tim, Bob, and Joe. Each of them expresses loving kindness by helping the others express loving kindness. So Joe expresses his loving kindness by helping Tim express his loving kindness, which is then helping Bob express his loving kindness. Then Bob's loving kindness is to help Joe possess his loving kindness. And so then it's just a loop. And even if it wasn't just three people, if A is to help B, and B is to help C, and C is to help D, it just goes on forever, and there's no actual mission. Whenever we help someone, it's for a purpose. But if the goal is to just help, then there's nothing helping towards. So we know that the recipient of our loving kindness can't just be other people. Instead, the recipient of our loving kindness and goodness is physicality, the physical world in our own physical bodies. The physical world is designed to hide God's presence. It looks like a machine. Without revelation, a lot of us would not guess that God is behind it all, that he's directing and orchestrating every single thing, that he's creating this world every second, that he's the life force behind everything. Through man's actions, though, it becomes possible for the world to reveal and express God's presence, which is good. So how does the world express and reveal God's presence? Well, it can happen overwhelmingly when God performs miracles. When God split the Red Sea, it became obvious that God was present, that he was in control of everything. But it can also become possible through human actions. God has given us instructions about how humans can act so that the world can become godly. When we follow these instructions, we bring godness, goodness, into a world that naturally doesn't seem to have it. So think about this process. Our mind, with free will, reflects godliness. When we use our free will to decide to do God's will, that choice is good. Free will reflects God's attribute of self-determination, and choosing it to do God's will is godly. But what's even better is when we decide to do God's will and then actually do it through physical action, because the physicality then becomes the recipient of our choice. When we do the physical action, the physical then reveals godness. Consider a simple example, a dollar bill. On its own, a dollar bill is just a piece of paper. When it is used to buy something, the dollar bill becomes currency. But when it's used to give to help somebody in need, it then becomes charity. In that moment, the dollar bill became part of a godly act. This is what we mean when the physical becomes transformed and reveals godness. And even the physical body, becomes elevated in this, because the body naturally just wants to keep it, but giving it away elevates the body to godness. And so every physical thing that was in that chain reveals godliness. If you give a sweater to somebody in need, then the machines that were making that sweater, and the transportation that was used to deliver that sweater to the store, and the people who invented the machines, and the people who operate the machines and drove the vehicle, all of them become elevated when you give that sweater to charity. And of course, the sweater itself becomes elevated, revealing godness. Take another example. Human speech can be used for many things. It naturally wants to gossip, to complain. But when someone prays or blesses another person, the same vocal cords and the lips become a vehicle for attaching to God, for revealing godness. Speech, something that doesn't naturally reveal God, at that moment reveals God. So in all of these examples, something physical exists that naturally doesn't have any godness. A human being then uses free will to transform that physicality into something that aligns with God. And in this way, God becomes revealed in the world. So when we say that we want the world to reveal godliness, we aren't talking about magic and sparkles. It becomes a place where God's values are expressed, where His continual presence is recognized, and where human actions align with His will. In such a world, it becomes increasingly clear that God is behind everything. When people act with justice, mercy, truth, loving kindness, and the other moral qualities that God identifies with, they imitate God. In doing so, they show that human beings are more than just biological machines driven by instinct. Instead, they demonstrate that morality truly matters, and it shows that there's a moral order to this world. And it becomes obvious that these actions are truly right and good. And so then a world with this moral order points naturally toward a moral source behind that order. And so this is what gives the world its value. This is why God created it. When we use our free will to act according to God's will, we sanctify our bodies and the physical world. We also serve God and fulfill the initial purpose of creation, which was for us to have maximal goodness. And we're serving God's desire for us to have maximal goodness. So to summarize, God is perfectly good. A perfect being seeks to give. God therefore created human beings capable of possessing this goodness by reflecting God in free will. With free will, we can have the moral qualities, and the moral qualities allow us to have even more goodness because they are godly. But these moral qualities don't just exist in a vacuum. There need to be recipients. And so the physical world and our physical bodies are the recipients of these moral characteristics. God has told us how to interact with the physical world such that we develop these characteristics. And when we do them, that don't naturally want to do them, on the physical world that apparently doesn't have any godliness, then we start to reveal God's presence. It becomes obvious that God is behind everything. So in short, the purpose of creation is for humans to use their free will to bring God's goodness into the physical world to thereby reveal godness within it. This is how God can reside in our physical world. In the next video, we'll get into the Noahide specific purpose. Our laws seem to be only negative prohibitions. Do not do this, do not do that, do not do that. A vegetable can satisfy the commandments better than we can. So is this only what God wants us to do? To be a vegetable? Well, after this video, you could probably guess that the answer is no. So I encourage you to subscribe to stay tuned. I hope this video made sense. It was philosophically deep, and I hope I represented it accurately. It's largely based on the Ramchal and his Derech Hashem, and then commentaries by Rabbi Gottlieb. Anyway, I hope you learned something. Thank you for watching.